I saw her leave the house that night in a dress she hadn't worn in years. It wasn't the kind of outfit you wear to a casual dinner or an outing with friends. The tight fabric, the exaggerated perfume, the sparkle in the eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time, everything indicated that this wasn't just any night. My heart felt heavy in my chest, my stomach turned as if something inside already knew the truth even before I did. Something inside me was screaming, something I had been trying to shut up about for months. But in that moment, seeing her get into the car of a man I had never seen before, everything fell into place. My feet moved before I could process it. I grabbed the car keys and followed them. With every mile I covered, my body alternated between the heat of anger and the cold of disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Not with me. Not with her. Not with the woman with whom I built a life, with whom I shared dreams, plans, with whom I shared laughs and sleepless nights of love and complicity. But there she was, next to a stranger, smiling in a way she hadn't smiled at me in a long time. I stayed at a safe distance. My heart was beating so hard it was hard to breathe. I saw the car stop in front of an expensive restaurant, one of those places where couples in love celebrate birthdays and milestones. But what was there to celebrate there? What was she doing? Questions swirled around in my mind, but deep down, I already knew the answer. I just needed to confirm. They got out of the car. He opened the door for her. The chivalrous gesture, the way she smiled. My blood boiled. How many times have I done the same for her? How many times did I try to rekindle the flame, bring back the sparkle in her eyes that she now reserved for someone else? But to me, she only had excuses. I was tired. The work consumed her. It wasn't like before. And now, here, in front of a stranger, she seemed vibrant, alive. As if the problem had never been the routine, but rather, me. I stayed in the car for a while, trying to decide what to do. Should I go in? Confront her right there, in front of everyone? Raise your voice, demand explanations, destroy that moment like she was destroying everything we had? But something held me back. I needed to see how far she would go. I needed to know. If I were there, there might be excuses, lies, a show of regret. But if I followed her to the end, if I saw everything with my own eyes, there would be no doubt. Time seemed to drag by. Dinner lasted longer than I could bear. They laughed, they toasted, she threw her hair back like she did when she wanted to impress someone. I saw the way she touched his hand across the table, and in that moment, something inside me died. What I feared most was happening. It wasn't just a friendship. It wasn't just a phase. She was with someone else. When they left the restaurant, something changed. The man held her around the waist, and she didn't flinch. On the contrary, she leaned into him, laughing like a teenager in love. My body became tense, pain mixed with hatred consumed me from the inside out. But I still didn't know everything. There was still more to discover, something that would make me file for divorce without thinking twice. Something that would change everything. Their car started moving, and I kept following. With every kilometer, my breathing became heavier. They weren't coming home. The destiny they chose. No. It couldn't be. My heart wanted to stop. My vision became blurred. But I kept driving, because I needed to see it for myself. When they finally parked, I felt my world fall apart. It wasn't just an ordinary betrayal. It wasn't just a passing case. What I discovered that night not only destroyed my marriage, it revealed something I never could have imagined. And when the truth came out, I realized that my reaction would be much bigger than simply ending a relationship. I couldn't allow this to go unpunished. I couldn't just accept it, swallow this pain and move on. No. I needed to act. I needed to expose the truth. And in the end, when everything came to light, when the truth exploded before everyone's eyes, she finally understood what it meant to lose me forever. But what exactly did I discover that night? What was so terrible that made me decide to end it all immediately? This is something few would be able to bear. And when the truth is revealed, everything will make sense. Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal is not romanticized, is not justified, and will never be supported. The stories you will hear are fictional, but the pain, destruction, and consequences are real. Our goal is to show how infidelity can devastate lives, destroy homes, and leave deep scars. Get ready for an intense story, full of twists and turns and strong emotions. What you are about to hear will shock you. Now, take a deep breath, and let's get started. Daniel and Laura's first years of marriage were intense, full of passion, plans, and promises that seemed unbreakable. They met in college, when he was studying engineering and she was studying administration. Daniel has always been a meticulous man, one of those who calculate each step before making a decision. He was rational, balanced, and dedicated, qualities that made him a respected professional in his field and a reliable husband. Laura, on the other hand, was the exact opposite. Spontaneous, full of energy, dreamy and ambitious, she had the ability to make any environment lighter, and perhaps it was this difference in personalities that brought them together in the beginning. He found in her an escape from his predictable routine, while she saw in him an anchor, someone who gave her the security to follow her plans without fear. The wedding took place 5 years after they started dating, a beautiful event, surrounded by friends and family. The honeymoon was in Greece, a dream of Laura's, who always wanted to visit the islands and feel the warmth of the sun reflecting on the blue sea. During the first few years, everything seemed perfect. They bought a spacious house in a quiet neighborhood, decorated every corner with care, and began building the life they imagined together. Daniel worked for a large construction company, holding a leadership position that required many hours away from home, but which provided a comfortable life for both of them. Laura, in turn, set up a small online business, something that gave her flexibility in time to dedicate herself to what she really enjoyed. The balance seemed to work, and for a while, it did. But time passed, and routine installed itself like an unwanted visitor. What were once moments of complicity and partnership began to become a repetitive cycle of obligations and silence. Daniel struggled to keep things running, but the constant traveling for work and the pressure to grow within the company left him exhausted. He tried to make up for his absence with gifts, expensive dinners, and promises of trips that, most of the time, didn't materialize. Laura, on the other hand, began to feel an emptiness that she couldn't explain. The enthusiasm she had at the beginning of her marriage seemed to have dissolved, and as much as she still loved Daniel, she felt that something essential was missing. Conversations were no longer the same, gestures of affection became scarce, and the connection that was once strong now seemed fragile. Romantic dinners became silent dinners. He would ask her how her day was, but his words would come out automatically, without real interest. She responded vaguely, without emotion. The silence that followed seemed to shout louder than any argument they could have had. Sometimes Laura found herself looking at her husband and wondering when everything changed. When did he stop noticing details? When did she stop feeling those butterflies in her stomach when she saw him coming home from work? Maybe it was gradual, something that settled in little by little, without either of them noticing. But now, it was impossible to ignore. On weekends, Daniel tried to compensate for the emotional distance by planning programs for two, but Laura always seemed to find an excuse. She said she was tired, that she needed to work, that she had something to do with her friends. Deep down, it wasn't about the apology, but about how she felt when they were together. The sparkle in her eyes was no longer the same, her voice no longer carried the same sweetness when she spoke to him. Daniel noticed, but preferred to convince himself that it was just a phase, that with time everything would return to normal. He believed in the commitment they made at the altar, in the promise to be each other's forever, in the idea that every marriage has ups and downs. But what he didn't know was that, for Laura, the issue was no longer about a simple difficult moment. She started looking for distractions. He went out more often, saying that he needed to expand his network, that he was discovering new opportunities to grow professionally. He started to tidy up more, to worry about details that didn't seem so important before. She started coming home late, and when he asked, she responded with a calm smile, without explaining too much. Daniel, no matter how strange he felt something was, always trusted Laura. He was never the paranoid type, he was never a man of suspicion. He believed that the love they built was strong enough to withstand any challenge. But something was different. The way she used her cell phone, how she smiled at messages she never explained, how distant she was even when they were in the same house. He tried to ignore it. He tried to convince himself that it was all in his head, that he was just tired and projecting insecurities where they didn't exist. But the feeling didn't go away. And then, on that particular night, everything changed. When he got home early from work, he found the house empty. The silence was strange, uncomfortable. He picked up the phone to call Laura, but hesitated. It was then that he saw through the window the scene that would freeze his heart. Laura was rushing out the door, with a sparkle in her eyes that he hadn't seen in years. She was wearing a dress he hadn't seen in a while, those high heels that he always said were uncomfortable. And, more than anything, there was something about her, an air of enthusiasm, of excitement. He approached the window, watching her walk to the gate. And it was then that he saw the car parked in front. A car I didn't know. And a man she had never seen before coming out to greet her. The scene lasted seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Laura smiled. A genuine smile, the kind he no longer gave him. The man opened the door for her, and without hesitation, she got into the car. And then, they left. For a moment, Daniel was paralyzed. He felt his stomach turn, his chest tighten. He wanted to run to her, ask who that man was, demand explanations. But he couldn't move. All he could do was grab his own car keys and follow them. Because in that moment, he knew. I knew it was no longer a phase. I knew it wasn't just in your head. And, most importantly, I knew that that night would change everything. Daniel kept his hands firmly on the steering wheel, but his heart was beating so fast that he felt his entire body pulsating. The road seemed like a blur before his eyes as he followed the car ahead, keeping a safe distance so as not to be noticed. At every turn, at every light, his mind wavered between denial and acceptance of what he was about to witness. He didn't want to believe what his own eyes had seen moments ago, but the way Laura carried herself, the smile she gave the stranger, the way she got into the car without hesitation, everything pointed to something he could no longer ignore. The journey wasn't long, but for Daniel, it seemed like an eternity. He hoped that she was going to meet friends, that perhaps this was just an exaggeration of her tired mind, but hope dissipated when the car parked in front of a discreet hotel, the kind that doesn't attract attention, but that hides stories that should never come to light. Daniel felt his stomach turn. He didn't need anything else to understand what was happening. He wanted to be wrong, he wanted there to be a rational explanation, but there was a limit to what his reason could take. Outside the hotel, he saw the man get out of the car and walk to the passenger door, opening it for Laura, who got out, adjusting her dress. She threw her hair back, laughing at something he said, and then, without hesitation, grabbed his hand. That touch was like a stab to Daniel. There was no shyness, there was no uncertainty. This wasn't a casual meeting, it wasn't something recent. This was familiarity, intimacy. A habit that can only be created with time and repetition. They entered the hotel, and Daniel remained in the car, motionless, his mind clouded by the impact of what he had just witnessed. His chest burned. It wasn't just anger. It was the pain of realizing that everything he had built alongside Laura was crumbling right there, before his eyes. Memories of the years together came like a whirlwind. Every birthday, every promise exchanged, every moment of complicity. The way he believed she was his partner, his best friend, someone he could trust. Now all those memories felt dirty, stained by the betrayal he had just witnessed. He tried to take deep breaths, tried to calm down, but there was no escape from that pain. She was there, crushing him, tearing him apart from the inside out. Time passed in a confusing way. Minutes, maybe hours. He couldn't say. I just knew I couldn't just leave. He needed to see her get out of there. He needed to look into her eyes and confirm that this wasn't a nightmare he could wake up from. And then, when the hotel door opened again and the two emerged side by side, something inside him broke once and for all. Laura held the man's arm naturally, as if it belonged to that moment. They weren't saying goodbye in a hurry, they weren't worried. They walked slowly, without fear of being seen. Daniel clenched his fists, feeling his nails dig into his palms. He wanted to get out of the car, he wanted to confront her right there, he wanted to scream, he wanted to ask her how she had the courage. But something held him back. It wasn't fear. It wasn't hesitation. It was a cruel clarity. If he confronted her there, she would find excuses, make up lies, maybe cry, maybe swear to repentance. But at that moment, he didn't want words. He wanted to understand. And to understand, he needed to wait. When Laura got back into her lover's car and they left, Daniel took a deep breath, trying to control the turmoil inside him. But one thing was certain. It wouldn't end there. He was not a man who simply accepted being deceived. He wouldn't let her continue living this farce without consequences. And deep down, even though he felt the crushing pain of betrayal, something told him that there was still more to be discovered. Something he didn't know yet. Something that, when it came to light, would make everything make sense. Daniel didn't sleep that night. The images of Laura entering that hotel with another man replayed in his mind like a broken tape, without pause, without rest. Every detail gnawed at him, every smile exchanged, every complicit gesture. He got up from bed several times, walked around the house, stared at his reflection in the mirror, trying to understand at what moment everything slipped out of his hands. But there was no answer. The only certainty he had was that he could no longer live with that doubt eating away at him. He needed to confront her, he needed to hear the truth from her mouth, even if it hurt more than it already was. When the day dawned, Laura walked through the door with the calmness of someone who had nothing to hide. He threw his bag on the sofa, stretched his arms and took a deep breath, as if he had had the best night's sleep of his life. Daniel, sitting at the kitchen table, watched her every move in silence, feeling the anger bubbling beneath his skin. He waited for her to turn around to face him, but when she didn't, he decided to break the silence. The tone of his voice was cold, dry, with no room for mistakes. She stopped halfway, her shoulders stiffened, and only then did she turn to him. Laura's eyes took a second longer than they should have to find him. Daniel watched the exact moment her mask broke. It was a quick moment, but enough. She tried to compose herself, tried to smile as if nothing was wrong, but he noticed the nervousness in her fingers, the way she ran her hand through her hair, her eyes avoiding his. He knew. She knew. But still, he tried to lie. The speech began as expected, loose sentences about a meeting with friends, a dinner that went on longer than it should have, a cell phone without battery that prevented her from informing him. Daniel waited for her to finish, waited for her empty apologies to fill the air between them, and then, with a calm he himself didn't know he possessed, he dropped the bomb. He said he followed her. He said he saw everything. He said there was nothing more to be explained. The silence that followed was heavy. Her eyes widened, and for a second, Daniel saw panic set in there. But then, something unexpected happened. Instead of tears, instead of pleas for forgiveness, Laura simply took a deep breath, looked away, and took a step back. Daniel expected regret, expected her to try to justify it, to look for a way to fix what she did. But no. What he saw was something much worse. It was resignation. As if, at that moment, she had understood that she had been discovered and that there was no longer any reason to maintain the charade. Daniel didn't need to ask how long it had been happening. He knew it wasn't recent. The way she acted, the lack of hesitation, the intimacy she saw between her and that man, this wasn't a one-night mistake, it wasn't a moment of weakness. It was something planned, something that had been happening for a long time. And that, more than anything, was what hurt the most. She never intended to confess. She would have carried this on, perhaps for years, if he hadn't found out. But then came the part he didn't expect. The final blow. The truth he could never have imagined. When he asked who the man was, expecting to hear the name of a random stranger, Laura hesitated for a second longer. And it was at that moment that Daniel realized. Something was wrong. Her reaction was not that of someone who simply felt embarrassed about being caught. It was the reaction of someone who was hiding something bigger. He narrowed his eyes, felt his heart speed up. The question echoed in the air. Who was he? Laura looked away, pursed her lips. He tried to buy time. But Daniel didn't back down. He pressed, demanded, and then came the answer. And with it, the complete destruction of what was left inside him. The man Laura was seeing was not a stranger. He wasn't a coworker, a gym friend, a customer at the cafe where she spent her afternoons. He was someone Daniel knew well. Someone who was part of your life. Someone who was by his side in the most important moments. The man Laura cheated on him with was his own brother. Daniel's world spun. The ground seemed to disappear beneath his feet. He was unable to process it immediately. The words hung in the air, echoing in his mind like thunder. Your brother. Your blood. The betrayal was already unbearable in itself, but this was the height of cruelty. The lump in his throat tightened, breathing became difficult. His own brother. The man who should have been by his side, who shared his childhood with him, who grew up with him, who was his confidant, his partner in the most difficult times. Laura didn't cry. He didn't beg. She just stood there, waiting for him to absorb the truth. And that was what irritated Daniel the most. The lack of remorse, the absence of guilt. She didn't try to deny it. I didn't try to justify it. And then, when he finally spoke, his voice was low but firm. He said that it wasn't a mistake, that it wasn't something that just happened. She said she and Daniel's brother had a connection, something she couldn't explain. She said he understood her in a way Daniel never could. Anger took over Daniel. It wasn't just about Laura, it wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about everything. About the breach of trust, about the destroyed family bond, about humiliation. He wanted to scream, he wanted to attack whoever was within reach. But at the same time, I knew that none of that would help. The damage was already done. There was no going back. The silence dragged on for a few seconds. Laura held his gaze, waiting for his reaction. But Daniel would not give him that pleasure. It wouldn't explode. He would not show weakness. He just took a deep breath, grabbed his car keys and walked out the door, without looking back. Because at that moment, he understood that there was nothing more to say. But what he didn't know was that it was far from over. Daniel drove aimlessly. The steering wheel felt heavy in his hands, and the road in front of him was just an unimportant blur. The muffled sound of tires on asphalt contrasted with the chaos unfolding inside. His own brother. He repeated this phrase in his mind, as if trying to find a way to fit it into a reality that made sense. But it didn't. Nothing made sense. It was too cruel. A double betrayal, coming from where he least expected it. His chest burned, and the air seemed insufficient. The car was moving, but he didn't know where it was going. He just knew he couldn't go home. Not after that. The cell phone vibrated on the dashboard. He looked at the display and Laura's name flashed on the screen. Didn't answer. The device vibrated again, and now another name appeared. Your brother. The same person who, until a few hours ago, he would still call family. A mixture of disgust and anger rose in his throat, and in an impulsive gesture, he grabbed his cell phone and threw it on the passenger seat. I didn't want to hear either of their voices. I didn't want explanations. Explanations for what? What could be said that would make it all less unforgivable? He stopped the car in front of a small bar, one of those that open late and where no one asks questions. I needed a moment to breathe, a space where I could exist without being crushed by the truth. He went in, sat at the counter and ordered a whiskey. The first sip went down burning, but it wasn't enough. Asked for another. Then one more. The anger was still there, but now mixed with a tiredness that seemed to take over his body. The voices around him were just distant noises, and he realized he didn't want to think. I didn't want to relive every scene, every detail that now seemed like a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. But fate, relentless as always, had other plans. That's when he felt a hand touch his shoulder. A familiar, male voice. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Daniel, listen to me. His brother's mere presence there made his blood boil. He turned slowly, meeting those eyes that for years he had considered loyal. Now everything I saw was a lie. His expression was serious, but there wasn't enough guilt there. Just a pathetic attempt to fix something that was beyond repair. What are you doing here? Daniel asked, his voice full of venom. I needed to talk to you. Did you need it? He laughed, but it was a humorless laugh, full of contempt. After everything, now you think you have something to say? The brother sighed, pulling up a bench next to him. I know you're angry, anger. Daniel interrupted, clasping the glass in his hands. You have no idea what I'm feeling right now. I wanted to tell you before, but he didn't tell. Daniel cut in, his eyes burning. You preferred to deceive me. He preferred to go behind my back. You preferred to stab me. That's not how it happened. Then explain to me. Daniel leaned over, looking him in the eyes. Tell me, how exactly did it happen? How did you look at my face all this time knowing what you were doing? The brother ran his hand over his face, as if searching for the right words, but Daniel knew that there were no words that could alleviate that. I never wanted it to be like this. But it was. He clenched his fists. You destroyed everything. I fell in love with her. Daniel felt his stomach drop. The phrase hung in the air like a sentence. The brother continued, his voice lower. I fought it, Daniel. I tried. But, it happened. It happened. He repeated, laughing bitterly. It happened because you allowed it. The silence that followed was deafening. Didn't you ever notice that she wasn't happier? The question was a punch. Daniel felt something sharp inside him, a mixture of pain and fury. Do you want to put the blame on me? His voice was cold. Do you want to justify what you did by saying that she wasn't happy? The brother lowered his head, but Daniel didn't stop. If she wasn't happy, she could have talked to me. It could have ended. But no. She preferred to deceive me. And you were my brother. You should have protected me, not been the first to betray me. The silence between them was charged. Daniel knew there was nothing more to say. He got up, leaving money on the counter, and without looking back, left the bar. The night air was heavy. He felt his eyes burn, but he refused to let any tears fall. He had already lost too much. You wouldn't lose yourself. As I walked to my car, I knew this would be the last time I would look back. They were in the past. Now, he just needed to decide what to do with the future. Daniel drove aimlessly, the city lights going unnoticed as the darkness inside him grew thicker. The meeting with his brother did not bring relief, he did not offer explanations that would make it seem less absurd. It just confirmed everything he already knew. He had been betrayed not only by his wife, but by someone who was supposed to be his family, someone who grew up by his side, who shared the same memories, who was supposed to be one of the few people in the world he could trust without hesitation. The bitter taste of disappointment was almost physical, a pressure in the chest that didn't let up. He tried to imagine what the next step was, but the answer always seemed distant, as if he were trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. He parked the car in front of the house he built with Laura, the home that, for years, he believed was the space where they would share dreams, achievements and failures. Now, every brick of that structure seemed contaminated, every piece of furniture, every carefully chosen detail carried the weight of something that no longer existed. He stayed there in the car for long minutes, observing the house without being able to find the courage to enter. What would he find? Would Laura still be there? Or would she have left to hide from the shame of facing him after everything? He took a deep breath, feeling the early morning cold penetrate his skin as he got out of the car. The door was ajar. His body tensed, but he continued inside, finding Laura sitting on the sofa, her eyes red, an open bottle of wine at her side and an almost untouched glass. She raised her head when she saw him enter, her gaze filled with something he couldn't define. Blame? Sadness? Or just the resignation of someone who already knew that nothing more could be said? Daniel closed the door behind him calmly. There was no rush now. The truth had already been exposed, and all that was left was to deal with the consequences. I didn't expect you to come back, Laura broke the silence, her voice weak, as if the words weighed more than they should. Neither do I, he replied, walking to the armchair opposite her. His gaze was fixed, and for the first time, he saw her without the mask from before. Without the excuses, without the half-truths. Just a woman stripped of any illusion that she could fix this. He came to talk to you, didn't he? Yes. She let out a heavy sigh, resting her elbows on her knees and burying her face in her hands. What did he say? Enough. Silence settled between them again, thick and suffocating. Daniel didn't look away, he wanted her to feel every second of it, to understand that he wasn't there to forgive her, but to understand how far everything had gone. How long? The question came bluntly, without hesitation. Laura closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to muster the courage to respond. 1 year. The impact was immediate, as if a sharp blade went through his skin. 1 year. 12 months of living a lie, looking into his eyes without remorse, pretending to be the woman he thought he knew. Have you ever thought about stopping? She hesitated, her gaze lost on the wood of the floor. Yes. But it didn't stop. She shook her head slowly, a small movement that confirmed what he already knew. I wanted. But what? His voice was cold, merciless. She looked up, and for the first time that night, her expression seemed to break. But I fell in love. Daniel felt short of breath. Not that he didn't already know, but hearing those words made everything even more real. She wasn't just getting involved physically, it wasn't just a matter of desire. It was something deeper, something that no longer belonged to him. Did you mean to tell me? She hesitated. I don't know. So until when would you have continued? Until I find out. Until it becomes unsustainable. I don't know. She raised her voice, frustration boiling over. I didn't plan this, Daniel. I didn't wake up one day and decide to hurt you. But it hurt. His answer was simple, cutting. She ran her hands over her face, exhausted, perhaps as much as he was. I tried to make it work. I tried to stay with you, pretend that it was still the same, that we could go back to who we were before. But I couldn't. And I hated myself for it. Daniel held the air in his lungs for a moment before slowly releasing it. I spent months thinking the problem was with me. That you were distant because I wasn't trying hard enough. I tried to be better, I tried to understand. And meanwhile, you were here, living another life. Her eyes were teary now, but he didn't want tears. I didn't want pity. What do you expect me to do now, Laura? That I understand. That I accept. She bit her lip, her breath shaky. "I hope you move on." The response was like a punch in the gut. He felt a lump tighten in his throat, but he didn't allow any emotion to escape. "Do you want to be with him?" She took her time to respond, but when she did, her voice was barely a whisper. "I think so." He stood up slowly, feeling the weight of that conversation fall on his shoulders. He looked around, observing every detail of the house that was no longer his. "So that's it." She didn't respond. You just watched him as he picked up his keys and walked to the door. "Daniel." He stopped, but didn't turn around. "I'm very sorry." He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the words float in the air. Then, without looking back, he opened the door and left. The night was cold, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he could breathe. He didn't know exactly where he was going, but he knew that the only possible direction now was away from there. And maybe, just maybe, there was something waiting for him beyond that pain. Daniel walked aimlessly through the city, feeling the cold early morning wind cut into his skin as if it wanted to take away any trace of pain from him, any trace of what was still left of that life that, now, seemed completely distant. The silence of the street was a cruel contrast to the whirlwind of thoughts in his mind. The conversation with Laura echoed in his head, every word, every expression, every pause loaded with hidden meanings. She had chosen her brother. Not in an impulsive way, not in a moment of weakness, but in a conscious, permitted way, nurtured over an entire year. While he believed he was trying to save a marriage, she had already found refuge elsewhere, in the arms of someone who was supposed to be her family. Betrayal was not just the act itself, but everything it meant. The lie, the manipulation, the lack of consideration for what they built. He stopped in front of an almost deserted square, only a few dim lights illuminated the benches and trees around. He sat down heavily, resting his elbows on his knees, feeling the tiredness finally catching up with him. For the first time, she allowed herself to relax her shoulders, to release the air that seemed trapped inside her. What would come now? How can you rebuild something that was destroyed in this way? Divorce was inevitable. Separation was the only way out. But what then? What was left after seeing your confidence, your vision of the future, your feelings, being crushed like that? The sound of soft footsteps caught his attention. He looked up and saw a woman walking slowly along the cobblestones, holding a coat closed around her body as if trying to protect herself from the cold. She seemed lost in thought, her face dimly lit by the streetlights, but it was only when she got closer that Daniel realized who it was. Sophia. The meeting was unlikely, but not entirely unexpected. Sophia has always been a presence in his life in some way. They had known each other for years, a friendship built through work, casual encounters at events, conversations that, no matter how superficial, always carried a comfortable naturalness. She was never someone who was too close, but she was always there, orbiting his world in a discreet way. She stopped when she saw him there, her eyes showing surprise and then something softer, almost a silent understanding. "Daniel? What are you doing here at this hour?" He let out a small, humorless laugh, running a hand through his hair. "Trying to figure out how to move forward." Sophia watched him for a moment before sitting next to him on the bench without hesitation. He didn't ask anything right away, he just stayed there, present. That, somehow, was a relief. He didn't want any more questions. I didn't want any more explanations. He just wanted to exist for a moment without having to justify the storm that was inside him. "You don't look well," she commented after a few moments, her voice low, without judgment. Daniel sighed, leaning against the back of the seat and staring at the dark sky. "I found out today that my wife is cheating on me." Sophia was silent. There was no shock in his expression, no exaggerated surprise. Just a genuine sadness that showed in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Daniel." He turned his face to look at her, searching for any trace of pity, but he found none. What he saw was something deeper, more true. "Do you know what's worse?" It wasn't with a stranger. It was with my brother. This time, Sophia blinked, as if she needed to process the information. Your brother? He nodded slowly, and for a moment, he felt like he could finally breathe those words without his chest burning so much. For a year. Sophia passed her hand over her face, as if she didn't know exactly what to say. There's no excuse. Daniel laughed lightly, a bitter, short sound. No, there isn't. The silence between them lengthened, but it wasn't uncomfortable. He felt like he could just exist there, without needing to fill the space with empty words. It was a different feeling than he had had all day. The house, the car, the meetings with Laura and her brother, everything seemed suffocating. But there, sitting on that bench, next to Sophia, he felt a little lighter. She didn't ask what he would do now. He didn't try to advise him. He just stood there, as if he knew that sometimes the best answer to pain was just presence. After a while, it was she who broke the silence. Do you have anywhere to go? Daniel blinked, looking back at her. I don't want to go home. Then come with me. He frowned, surprised by the naturalness of the offer. What? Sophia gave a small smile, but her look was serious. I'm not inviting you to anything other than a safe place. You don't have to spend this night alone. For a moment, he hesitated. But then he realized he didn't want to refuse. He needed this. He needed to get out of there, away from the weight of that house, that unbearable reality. All good. The two stood up, walking side by side in silence. Something inside Daniel changed in that instant. Maybe he still didn't know exactly what came next, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe there was a chance to start over. Daniel did not return home that night, nor the following nights. After all, that place no longer belonged to him. Every corner of that house was permeated with Laura's lies, with the betrayal that destroyed everything he believed he had. The decision to leave was easy, almost instinctive, as if his body already knew that remaining in that space would only prolong the suffering. He spent the first few days at a friend's apartment while he sorted out the divorce. Laura tried to call a few times, but he didn't answer. There was nothing more to be said. He refused to give her the right to prolong this, to try to find justifications that didn't exist. The lawyer handled everything, and within a few weeks, the papers were ready. Daniel didn't ask for anything. I didn't want the house, I didn't want to discuss division of assets. I just wanted to cut any remaining ties with her. Laura didn't object. Maybe out of guilt, maybe out of knowing that there were no arguments that could reverse that situation. The signing was quick, without tears, without attempts at reconciliation. But deep down, he knew that things wouldn't be so simple for her. What seemed like a great love, an unbreakable connection, soon turned into something very different. Her brother, the one she destroyed her marriage for, wasn't ready to bear the consequences of everything they did. The relationship that seemed intense and uncontrollable began to show cracks as soon as everyday obligations fell upon them. The clandestine romance, once fueled by danger and adrenaline, lost its luster when it became public. The disapproving looks, the whispers in the hallways, the friends who walked away, everything started to take a toll. And then, doubt came. What seemed like an uncontrollable desire turned out to be a hasty and selfish decision. Laura began to realize that the man she risked everything for was not who she imagined. He wasn't stable, he wasn't trustworthy, and most of all, he wasn't willing to bear the guilt that came with the weight of his actions. Fights broke out, small at first, then inevitable. When she realized it, she was alone, abandoned by what should have been her great love. He left her the same way he won her, without remorse, without looking back. Meanwhile, Daniel moved on. At first, it was difficult. The pain was still raw, the anger still boiled over from time to time. But something inside him began to change. He began to focus on himself, something he hadn't done in years. If before his life revolved around maintaining a marriage that was already broken, now he had the freedom to live as he wanted. He returned to his old habits, found comfort in his work, and began to see a future where before he saw only disappointment. And then, without him expecting it, Sophia became a constant presence. She never forced anything, never tried to fill a space that wasn't ready to be occupied. He was just there, with his calm, his lightness, offering silent and undemanding support. Over time, Daniel realized that he enjoyed her company more than he realized. The conversations flowed effortlessly, the silences were comfortable, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he could trust someone again. What started as friendship turned into something more, something that grew naturally, without rushing. And then, one day, he realized that he no longer thought about the past with pain. The betrayal was still a scar, but not one that defined who he was. He looked at Sophia and saw a new beginning, a new path, without shadows, without lies. Laura, in turn, was never able to rebuild what she lost. Regret came too late, and when she realized it, there was no one willing to offer her a second chance. Life went on, as it always does. But now, for Daniel, she remained hopeful. Because in the end, he understood that some losses are not really losses. They are liberations. If you've made it this far, leave your thoughts on this story in the comments. What was the part that surprised you the most? We want to know your opinion. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new stories like this. Here, betrayal is neither romanticized nor forgiven. Because in the end, whoever chooses to deceive always pays the price.